I'm super excited about today's topic, and I cannot stress enough on the relevance of it, especially take a look at the entire AI maturity curve, the tools and the applications that are being built out right now, and how there's a trend of decision influencing powers finally shifting to the end user. But before we get into that, it'll be great if you could introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about RioDev.
Sure. So yeah, I am Achintya. I am the co-founder and CEO at Rio.dev. And Rio.dev is a sales and marketing stack for B2D or business to developer companies. And what was like SaaS in the last decade is going to be infrastructure and developer tools in this decade, as you see so many of them coming. And as you correctly mentioned, developers play a very important role in the purchase decisioning of such kind of tools. But what is so interesting about this persona is that essentially you are selling to a persona that is averse to most forms of modern forms of sales and marketing, at least, right? And that is in fact that is where B2B is very different from B2D, right? And these are the challenges that we help our customers solve. And how we do that is we look at intent signals across the internet, third party, first party, second party, of developers who are sort of interacting with our products, our customers product assets, and AI tag them and triangulate them under account. And hence we're able to derive intel that, okay, and tell our customers that these are the accounts that are actually sort of as an organization level interested in your tool or your product. And not just we give them these sort of hot accounts, we also give them, okay, these are the developers as leads who are actually trying it out. And sort of this is the organizational hierarchy, and hence these are the buyers potentially for your tool, and then give them the context and sort of tools to take it to the last mile, right? How do you convert this intel into actual customers? So yeah, that's what Rio.dev is about.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introductions. And B2D is essentially the core essence of what I wanted to discuss with you today. And I start off with a very basic question just to set the context a little bit better. Uh, can you help us understand the sort of companies that should be focusing on developers as their primary go-to-market strategy, and why exactly should they be doing that?
Sure. So see, as an outset, it probably sounds very trivial that if you are a developer focus or a developer tool company, you should be sort of thinking about developer or developer marketing. But we think actually otherwise. Like if you look at the trends, you can clearly see that developer is a new technology buyer, and sort of more. And so, for example, I feel that 5 years down the line, every marketer on some level or other would be thinking about this person, or would be worried about sort of targeting it. And the reason for that is that software is increasingly becoming composable. That means more and more B2B softwares are acting like B2D softwares, right? Where, they are available to give their data functionalities to be stitched into some other software or some other organization's interface. I mean, case in point, look at HubSpot, right? A typical B2B software. But if you go to their website, you will see a developer section, and they're giving tremendous resource and documentation that how a HubSpot data can be taken out to create different apps, or put the data of the CRM together. Or look at Clearbit or Apollo, like, typical marketers B2B SaaS product, but now they have exposed their data as APIs, right? And organizations want to stitch the data together under interface rather than users looking at different screens. And not just that, once you have that it becomes really possible to enrich the data, put in the right format, which is more usable. So these are trends where we see that, there are two choices in front of developers today, right? One is in front of marketers today. One is either they are thinking about developer marketing today, or they will be soon thinking about it like in a very near future.
Got it. And like, it's great that you brought up the entire developer marketing bit of it. And that's something I wanted to double click upon. For any marketing campaign or anything in general about sales and marketing to work, it's imperative that we understand your uh, buyer's persona, right? So it'd be great if you could maybe talk a little bit about that and elaborate about how does a developer think, where do they spend their time, their priorities in life in general.
Sure. No, that's a great question, and it's great Shivami brought it across, because it is very important for businesses and marketers to know how B2D is different from B2B. So if you look at typical, sort of a SaaS B2B playbook, you have your visitors to sort of MQLs to even PQLs today, and then sort of, somebody starts looking at it, knocking door, converts into SQL, and then customers, the typical B2B playbook. B2D essentially is very different because very clearly you have two personas involved. One is the end user or the developer. And now he's not looking at sort of purchasing anything. His incentive and motive is to sort of, solve a problem which is like, so he's building an engine and he's looking at like nuts and bolts and pistons and wedges to sort of, build that. And unless until he's reasonably confident that you're the right nut and bolt, right, he won't be recommending that. So there is no purchase decisioning that's happening, otherwise. And hence B2D companies are so good in sort of, the best ones at least, in giving sort of, tools for these developers, which is outside the purchase process, to actually try it out and at least go to a reasonable level of a POC. So in a way, this persona, instead of, there's not try before you buy. It's almost like build before you buy, right? So then that's one persona, the user. And then there is another persona like a buyer. And now this would be like a CTO or a head of product or somewhere even a CEO, and sort of, all their and they behave more like a B2B buyer, but they are heavily influenced by these developers. So very few chances that you'll be going outside the recommendation of sort of a developer who is telling them what to buy and what not to buy. So, and that's how, this whole process is linked. And how you see is that at one end of the process, if you look at the user, the developer, it is more bottoms up. He does not want to be sold, and hence he will be averse to most forms of marketing, right? And he wants to be educated, right? So if you look at sort of, their behavior, they if and hence so many things become clear, because they are then looking at sort of, when they need support, they want it quickly, they want the best experience, they want to sort of understand the tool, really get educated. Whereas there is a buyer who actually wants to build a business case, but it happens once the developer has sort of, done a reasonable okay from their side. So yeah, that is how we feel that, most so the B2D process behave. And marketers, once they understand that they need to see that, okay, these are not one persona, and hence they cannot have, like one model fitting every one kind of, nurtures or marketing process. They need to understand, okay, who is a user and who is a buyer. And once you do that with the reasonable intelligence, and that's where tools like us come, but once you do that, you can do your marketing much better.
Got it. And then it's great that you spoke about, like, how developers always in search for nuts and bolts, like, to make sure that their process is getting optimized better with XYZ amount of tools out there. So, like, multiple questions, and I'm going to start off with, again, a very basic one, is that we've noticed that the entire ecosystem is so crowded, right? Like, for every developer who is searching for one tool, you got 10 options, you got 15 options, right? How should a company go about capturing a developer's attention?
Right. So, okay, how you look at a developer's persona is the funnel of how they use your product is very different. Essentially, too much that level that probably I hate using the word funnel, but
Mhm.
there it looks like that, you have the developer knows about your product through, say, somebody whom he trusts, like a community or recommendation, or researches on their own and learns about your product, starts trying about it, initial education, etc. Probably, I mean, and here in this part, he wants to reach hello world as soon as possible, right? And from there, sort of, if that's okay, right, he will go deeper and start building the POCs and sort of a recommendation. If you look at that kind of a journey, right, what we see is how, I mean, how companies look at it is the first part of sort of, trying to, I mean, companies look at content beautifully. So content and communities work really well in getting them into the mouth of this part of the funnel. And again, some of the best companies, if they do that, they'll be really focusing on their content efforts, right? Of, how not just sort of how they write the content, but the content is actually not marketing in any level, but
Mhm.
sort of, adding value to solving their problem.
It's more like
With
educational in nature, right? Like where you're talking about the
absolutely
product and the value that it can provide.
right, and you can actually literally see it, right? So, for example, if you go to their website, which is more sort of marketing and business or buyer oriented, as compared to if you see their docs, right? There's a very different way of sort of how they are treating their language and their content, etc. there. But yeah, I mean, the second thing is that once sort of comes and start building, then some of the best practices companies do is they're looking at a great developer experience. Okay, so how quickly can developer get educated and try something on their own to sort of get an early win into the product? Because the longer that takes, the increased developer frustration, and sort of hence them saying that, hey, this is not the product for them.
Mhm.
And then from there, sort of again providing them free credits, tools, etc. So once they're in the funnel, probably they'll sign up, they'll start using, they will try out your products, and then they are looking at sort of very good support ecosystem. Because once a developer has, if he's getting stuck somewhere, then these companies are trying to solve them as soon as possible, because there might be a very big deal behind that evaluation or that query. So yeah, these are some of the things that we are seeing how companies are solving, the good B2D companies are solving across a developer.
Got it. So the idea is always to make sure that you're making sure that the developer is using your product as frequently as and as much as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think engagement is a very important thing here, right? And engagement comes very hand in hand with a great sort of ecosystem of support. And this support might be assisted or might not be assisted, and sort of is coming through AI tools or through content, etc. But yes, I mean, essentially you're looking at increasing the developers' time on your product, but also sort of you are looking at, okay, does this, so good intent signals that we see is that it starts with a pioneer. One developer found out a tools, new tool, started using it, and then you will see some organic spread, like a virality within this team, right? So you'll see 2 or 3 developers have joined, right, and have now starting to use tools. Second parameter that organizations look at is, are there more developers from the same organization that are joining, right? So is there's internal acceptance of this tool.
Understood. And I know we've discussed this point so many times in the past as well. And it's great that you brought up the virality aspect of it, because something that even we've realized that the entire developer community is very tight knit in nature, right? And there's a very good chance that they can evangelize your product a lot better than any XYZ marketing campaigns out there. So, how do you capitalize on this fact that once you've captured a developer's attention, how do you make sure that they're talking about you to everyone that they know?
Right. So good B2D companies have a very strong hold on the communities. What we see them that is that they are listening a lot. So, and essentially, so there are a couple of things, right? One is that if your product is strong and there is an evangelist, he himself would like to sort of promote your product, and there is no added incentivization that you like to give them, but you would like to give them the channels and tools so that a developer who is in need for a product and developer who's willing to evangelize it, right, can sort of talk. And we have looked at, so there are multiple things that B2D companies do there. One is that they are very, very active on some of these open communities like a Stack Overflow, so they're listening there, or Twitter, or the other thing is that they are providing a lot of helpful guide and content on YouTube, etc. Right? So that it creates a forum for somebody to evangelize. They are very big in influencer marketing, actually, and they try to bring up the developers who are talking about them and have certain level of influence, right? So this is what happens at the top of the funnel. If you look at the mid of the funnel, they'll be using these evangelists to sort of creating their own private forums. So that means they will have their own Slack community where they will like to sort of these guys to participate, or they would be having online or offline sessions where they'll be getting these guys to um, sort of talk about the product. But yes, I mean, what I'll say is that part of it happens organically, right? And that means it eventually comes to how good your product is. And I think this is like 90% important, at least, because if you don't have a good product, right, nothing happens
Yeah,
and
yeah.
nobody's going
I think
to,
that's yeah, that's taken.
right,
Yeah,
right. That's taken for granted, right? But
yeah.
once you have that, then some of these tools as a marketer is important, because now how do you establish virality,
Got it.
or
And
at
one
least
thing that I'm noticing, yeah, one thing I'm noticing so far is that the influencers who are the developers within a company at this point, their requirements and what they're looking out from you is very different from a CTO who probably be the end decision maker in the entire uh, sales process, for like for lack of a better word at this point. So as a developer, as a company who's selling, your focus of sales has to be multiple, right? Like you're focusing, your messaging is very different to developers compared to a CTO in this case. So how does the entire sales cycle look like from bottom to top?
Right. So I think the first step is to understand any lead or any intent signal, what is the motive behind that? And so the motive can be a user who is trying it out, an influencer who is crazy about it and is willing to talk about it, or a buyer. And at places this might be the same person but a very different mindset, right? So I think the first thing in and as I was saying, the sales funnel actually look like, there is a user and sort of he's using the product, makes a recommendation, and sort of in the buyer buying journey happens. And even if sort of buyer learns about the product, eventually it comes to a developer to sort of try it out. But what happens is that once you understand that, okay, this is the persona you are targeting, then your message needs to change accordingly. Once you understand, okay, this deal is still at an evaluation phase and this person is a developer who's trying it out, then you don't want to send the same marketing message like your nurtures that happen once you sign up for any
Yeah,
product, because they were always created in a B2B manner to end up for somebody to either talk to somebody or to buy the product. But that's not the intent here. In fact, very interesting thing is where B2B is very different from B2D is in B2B, PQL is assumed to be after MQL. Right. So, okay, some marketing happened and then somebody's trying. So PQL or product use is supposed to be an advanced signal. But if you look at developer behavior, it actually comes much before MQL, right? It's where somebody actually just starts sort of, knowing the product, right? And it's not even qualified. But marketers take the whole signal that, okay, it's a PQL, let's start, nurturing them the same way manner as a buyer. So I think once that differentiation happens that, okay, this is a user who is looking at learning the product and solving his own problem of the nuts and bolts and the engines analogy that we discussed, your messaging organically changes to sort of, okay, this is how we can help you, this is whom you can talk to, this is an engineer, and by the way, if he emerges out as an evangelist, how you can help us, right? Versus once you understand, okay, this person is a buyer looking at their designations or looking at sort of, their buying purchases. And of course, this is where companies like us help and sort of help you mine the data and understand this. Your behavior will be, okay, can we build a business case for you, right? This is how much it costs, this is how it will. So, and that is where the B2B marketers are really good at, right? That is what we have. So that is familiar territory.
understood. And I think it's an interesting point that you keep on bringing about marketeers in the B2D world. And this is something that we get asked pretty frequently as well, is that should companies who are again focusing on selling to developers hire someone specifically for marketing? And if so, where should they be present at to market their product?
Right. Um, so, yeah, I think it brings across a very important point that dev marketers are a very scarce resource today, right? So if you look at the typical cohorts in a B2D company, you see the devrels, right, who are actually sort of the ones who are considered the touch point of the developers. Then they are the marketers or the demand gen folks who are trying to bridge and build the entire demand funnel. And then you see the SDRs and AEs. I think honestly, B2D needs to be talked more. We are probably in the same era as when HubSpot started talking about B2B content. There are very few good resources of dev marketing, but that's coming up. So for example, I used to be a part of this dev marketing community, like a Slack channel, which used to be a very small cohort of some 100 people, like 3 months, 4 months back. But now that has grown to 800 people right now. So we are seeing more and more dev focused companies are coming up, more and more developer marketers are coming up. And soon sort of we feel that, there'll be more resources to help train developers, dev marketers in it, and probably we like to be one. And yeah, so that honestly, we feel that, there is more demand of dev marketers today than there is supply, and that has to be come from training more marketers into these kind of behaviors.
Into these kind of things. And there was one more point that I wanted to discuss is like, and something that we spoken about like few minutes back about running POCs and making sure that developers are using your product. So what are your thoughts on the general feedback loop over here, right? How should companies go about automating that and capturing as much as information that they're listening from the developers within communities?
Um, that's that's a good question. So there are two things that companies, or at least the best ones that we see, are doing, right? So one is that, B2B marketers have typically looked at a product usage behavior, right, across that. Okay, um, like look at your typical segment analytics, or or amplitude analytics, and etc., and see, okay, this is where there is a drop. So marketers are really good at that, or where they should be focusing, if they're focusing on developers, is that how does it lead into a support loop from there. So once you understand that, okay, somebody's dropping off, right, can you get the context of how they are dropping off? Just to give you an example, and sort of, sometimes it gets technical, but um, we look at how developers are installing codes on the docs. But if you look at the patterns of the sort of, chronologies of the codes that they are using, you can actually understand a good pattern of how much ahead. And that's where sort of the whole AI, which is very contextual, comes into comes into play. The other thing is that looking at sources, right? We felt that, unless until somebody is really convinced, like the top 5% of your funnel, as in the high the bottom 5% of your funnel, right, which is as close to purchase, is the one who will have the most signals on the product. But we realize that there are a lot of signals which are equivalent to somebody using a product, almost like a telemetry, but outside, which was docs, right? And we felt that this is an asset that is less used. But if you look at sort of, how developers are spending time on docs, you can actually learn a lot about how to get them to engage on a product and reach success. So we feel that docs is as important as an asset as product, and probably, but is less uh, focused on.
Got it. No, this makes absolute sense, and this brings me to my last question. Considering that we're almost at the top of the hour, is there any feedback or any advice that you might have for founders who are focusing into selling to developers?
Um, See, of course, everything we have learned is from founders like them, right? So, but yes, I mean, if we can sort of look at this, I think the most important thing is you have to really understand the persona behind a B2D purchase, right? And first sort of acknowledge that it is very different from B2B. And once you do that, and once you start sort of, segmenting, it's like one of the things we tell our customers is that, can you tag, or can you create amongst all your leads that you have, how can we help them understand, okay, this is a developer and this is not, right? But once you do that, then you can nurture them in a very different manner. So I think, yes, getting context and education of how this B2D is different from B2B perhaps is the most important thing.
Got it. I think this is an amazing way to end the conversation, Achintya. And again, thank you so much for taking the time out for this chat.